I wanted to talk about how sometimes it's good to not be known and to not be responsible to anyone. I feel like, again, because we've seen so many times, cancellations and people running into trouble and suffering for that at a globally broadcasted level, it's easy to kind of worry about how you act and behave. And this results in like a very sheep like culture. And what I mean by that is it's very timid and very pro conformity because if you see people doing things that, some ghost of public opinion that you've internalized would criticize. You see it on people how people glance at each other if they see something uncouth or something risky. They're like, oh my god, oh, or how they describe a situation. Well, this person did this and this. It's like, who the fuck is in charge? Like you're speaking of this like, oh, the king would be upset. Who's the king? Like that's really how a slave thinks and goes through life. But I understand it because in some sense it's sort of pragmatic in some regard, I guess. It's how you interface with other people who have internalized the same restrictions. So, anyways, it means that a lot of the time when, at least if you're like me, when you think about stuff, you kind of have in your head the institutional voice, the institutional perception, and you retain some aspect of yourself where you have to justify your behavior in relation to this voice because if you do want to do things in the world, you do have to exercise that voice because that voice, so long as it's well attuned and so long as it's not overly, if it's not if it's a tool for greater liberation in society, then I understand it. If it isn't, then it's not very good for you. But you can start to think that, well, to do things, I have to be able to justify them to the world, and so it's not the same thing. I mean, it is basically slavish, but it's not as slavish as sort of just feeling fear. There's ways in which you would then try to, whatever your conception is of this disciplinary voice, you would find ways of trying to persuade it otherwise, which is, in one way, supposedly a tool of liberation or an activity geared towards liberation. Anyways, this whole process can actually be something of a distraction. Sometimes it's not useful to try and just make your behavior seem like it's in accordance with propriety or to worry about it too much because you might just be wasting your time and your perception of how the world thinks might be narrow. And it might actually be that people have all kinds of different judgments, and it's hard to standardize judgment. And that if you are working with what you believe to be a standardized conception of judgment, you probably have had your brain colonized by someone else. That's actually probably more accurate, to be frank. But, oh well. No, that's important to point out. It's just, you know, yeah, yeah. I don't know. And it's not just institutions, by the way, that are responsible for producing some sort of like, authoritative voice in the back of our heads. It's also the mob that does this, right? It's also people who aren't a part of institutions or who don't speak for institutions, right? The sort of popularly ingrained prejudices typically come from people, like everyday people, and they're obnoxious. So you have this authoritative voice of community in your head, and that's just diabolical. And god damn it, guys, that sucks. I find myself the best way to fight back against cultural repression is to start developing a culture of one's own. So these monologic videos are helpful in that regard. Writing is also helpful in that regard, and I can be far more effective as a thinker and as how do I say this? I can more disentangle my mind when I write because there's a you become kind of disembodied from personality in a certain way when your written voice is sort of can more easily be a person's thoughts divested from the pressures of personality. That's a little vague, but that's the best that I can muster at this moment. When you're speaking, there's sort of um, there is a character that you put on in some way, and it's also very much influenced. When you speak, you're very much attuned to what you believe other people to be thinking about you when you communicate. When you write, you can just kind of distill a thought, and in a way, it's detaching yourself from yourself, but it's also the purest form of yourself. It's you when nobody's watching. It's you taking on. I mean, just saying through one's own eyes what it's like to take on the eyes of another. You really can push yourself out of yourself when you write. Yet somehow, in some manner, that's the purest form of yourself. Perhaps I don't want to get too philosophical on this, but you can maybe understand some of the points that are buried in this, mental sludge. But that's maybe too critical. But anyways, when writing, you can be just freer. I'll put it that way at the very least. You are free from the immediate circumstantial pressures of presentation when speaking to another person. Now, that's all to say that writing is perhaps the most efficient vehicle for self-liberation, but I haven't, I sometimes, yeah, reading isn't always going to be read by other people. One's writing is not always going to get read by other people. And, you can kind of compel people more to engage with a train of thought if it's presented to them immediately in the form of the spoken word. Writing sometimes strikes people as a chore. And I'm way too cognizant of how, just the expectation people have that they should involve themselves with as little reading as possible. I hate that. I would like reading to be a more standard part of culture. I would like it to be more normal. Firstly, for people to send long texts if they can't send letters. When people wrote letters, they could way more so sculpt themselves, polish their ideas, share deep things easily. The text is often used, like texting today is often used as a flippant mechanism for, kind of unserious discussion, but it not necessarily must be like that. You can use the text. You can use texting to be as profound as you could in a written letter. So I wish there were more opportunities for people to deepen how they engage with each other. And also that it were more normal for people to write and read each other's books. All right, that's enough for now. These are some thoughts. Goodbye.